I sat in my cramped studio loft in the heart of Pinecrest, Oregon, the early fall light slicing through the blinds like it was trying to warn me. On the table lay the cream cardstock envelope that had shown up between my property tax bill and a local election flyer. Bold serif font, the Pinecrest HOA crest embossed in shiny gold foil. Annual community meeting, required attendance. My name, Analyze Voss, sat dead center. I flipped it over, half expecting some cryptic message on the back. Instead, tucked behind the RSVP card was a handwritten note from Miranda Grant herself, the HOA president, our neighborhood's reigning Karen. Bring proof of compliance. Maybe the board will take pity on your little projects. No signature, of course. They never signed the venom. I said it out loud to the empty room, voice flat. I've interrogated white-collar crooks with more subtlety than this HOA circus. That night my burner phone buzzed once. Nothing dramatic, just the usual voice recording. Maintain cover. You're being watched. Nope, deviations. Even after years in the field, it still hit like cold water. My whole struggling hobbyist painter persona wasn't a hobby anymore. It was Kevlar. The Pinecrest HO, it wasn't just obsessed with grass height and curtain colors. They were skimming dues into shell companies, forging violation complaints to target anyone who didn't kiss the ring, and laundering cash through fake community beautification funds. I've been embedded here for 18 months, painting abstract pieces on recycled shipping boxes in my front yard just to stay under the radar. Every petty fine they slapped on me was another thread I pulled. Thursday morning, I drove through the wrought iron gates of the community center. My hands didn't tremble. I'd learned to hollow out reactions a long time ago. The place hadn't changed. White columns, lavender hedges clipped to military precision, the kind of perfection that screamed, nothing is allowed to fall out of place, especially not residents. A board member in a cheap valet vest opened my door without looking at me. Welcome, MS. Voss. He droned like I was checking into a hotel they wished would burn down. Inside the main hall, the air smelled of stale coffee and superiority. I scanned for my name card on the long oak table. Found it at the very end, scribbled in blue ballpoint, while everyone else got gold calligraphy. The chair? A wobbly aluminum folding thing. No cushion, no armrests, just cold metal and quiet humiliation. I sat down, smoothed the back of my coat, and let my eyes do the listening. Miranda Grant was already holding court by the fireplace, voice a syrupy mix of laugh and brag. When you're managing six-figure community budgets, there's simply no room for sentiment, she said, sipping her coffee like it was a stage prop. Her daughter/vice president, Lila, circled the table, leaning toward one of the newer neighbors and whispering loud enough for everyone to hear, "Don't ask her about her job. It's complicated." The lukewarm coffee in front of me stayed untouched. No one offered me the good stuff. Devin Lang, the HOA's pet lawyer, strolled in 15 minutes late. Firm handshakes for the loyal, fake smiles all around. When he reached me, he paused a half second too long, right hand twitching like it wanted to salute, but remembered we were in public. He knew exactly who I was. MS. Voss, he said carefully. I nodded. Counselor. The room went quiet just enough to feel deliberate. Miranda glanced at me, then at her daughter, a smirk blooming like it had been waiting all week. She tapped a fork against her water glass. 3 sharp raps, not a polite toast, but a gavel. I just want to take a moment to appreciate the talent we have at the table, she announced, voice dripping honey. Analyze still dabbles in her little paintings, bless her heart. She brought some examples. Those cardboard things she insists on displaying in her yard. I think you all should see the creativity. Soft, rehearsed laughter rolled around the room. The kind people give when they know it's cruel, but it's easier than silence. I didn't blink. I didn't offer a polite chuckle. I just sat in my folding chair with my blue pen name card and cold coffee and absorbed it. They thought silence was surrender. It wasn't. Miranda wasn't done. She reached into her designer bag and pulled out a folded violation notice, creased but lovingly preserved. Oh, and remember this little gem from last month's art walk? Analyze used recycled Amazon boxes again. We called it the cardboard eyesore. The room rippled with louder, polite laughter. My niece-age neighbor Leia, 14 and too sharp for her own good, looked up from her phone. Why does your invitation say hobbyist? Everyone else has their actual job title. I didn't answer out loud. I just scanned the room. Devin was dabbing sweat from his forehead with a linen napkin like the room had turned into a courtroom. Our eyes met for half a second. He looked away first. My name had also been left off the Community Heroes plaque in the hallway, another red flag I'd filed away months ago. This wasn't an oversight. This was orchestration. Midway through the dinner, a server leaned down and whispered, "Mrs." Grandma like a word in the hallway. I followed. Not because I was obedient, but because when someone keeps poking you in public, you start wondering what they're hiding in private. Miranda stood near the staircase, arms folded, pearls perfectly aligned, air smelling of rose perfume and pure disdain. I know it's not easy being around everyone, seeing how different paths turn out, she said without waiting for me to speak. We just want you to feel useful, analyze. Everyone knows you're sensitive. I kept my voice even. I'm not here to be useful. And I'm not here for your version of compassion. Oh, honey, she whispered conspiratorial. We all have roles. Yours just happens to be quieter. I turned to leave. She didn't follow. Back in the hall, Lila was standing, clutching a thin white envelope like it was an Oscar. She handed it to me with fake softness. Mom thought you should see this tonight. I opened it at the end of the table while they resumed their coffee in whispers. Inside was a revised community compliance agreement, bolded, underlined, non-essential resident. Analyze Voss may receive minor yard memorabilia as agreed upon. No voting rights, no community fund access, no voice. Just a polite acknowledgement that I might keep my cardboard if I behaved. Lila leaned in, voice coated in syrup. Art's not really an asset here. You understand? She clinked her glass against mine and turned away. I stared at that paper, but it wasn't the ink that burned. It was the casual assumption that I'd just roll over. I placed the envelope beside my untouched coffee and scanned the room again. No one was watching now. The performance had moved on. The air had thickened. Laughter had become background static. I rose slowly and made my way around the table toward Devin Lang. He was halfway through his second cup of something expensive, pretending to laugh at Lila's story. Devin, I said low enough to cut, but not loud enough to interrupt. He looked up too fast. MS. Voss, he replied with a smile that missed the landing. You were in my ethics seminar, weren't you? Georgetown, spring '09. He blinked. I smiled. Funny. That's what you call me too. The silence between us stretched just long enough to feel like a threat. He cleared his throat, adjusted his cufflink, and excused himself with the grace of a man who suddenly remembered he had somewhere else to be. I drifted through the hallway, letting my feet decide. They took me to the community legacy wall, a long corridor lined with framed photos, plaques, newspaper clippings, and golden frames. Miranda shaking hands with the mayor. Lila receiving a Woman of the Year award. The original founder's funeral program. And me? Nowhere. Not in the group photo from last year's block party I'd organized. Not even the candid shot of all the kids because I was the one holding the camera. I stood there until someone behind me cleared their throat. I didn't turn. I wasn't erased, I said quietly. I was never meant to be visible in the first place. In the side parlor, I sat on the edge of a leather chair and closed my eyes. Memory didn't knock, it walked in. A wiretap from 6 months ago. Miranda's voice. He's tied to the old fund. You want a clean house? Start with your own. Paper rustling. My name mentioned. Leveraged. That was the moment I knew how deep this went and exactly what I had to become to end it. Devin caught up with me near the entryway, face pale. They made me change the draft, he whispered. I had no choice. I looked him dead in the eyes. Everyone has a choice. Yours was cowardice. My phone vibrated in my clutch. Unknown number. They accessed the old fund. Do not react yet. Watch who signs. I slipped it back and finally met Miranda's gaze across the room. She didn't flinch. If anything, she smirked like she'd already won. The doors creaked open. A young server, visibly uncomfortable, carried in a medium-sized cardboard box wrapped in clear tape. On the side, black Sharpie, "Return to sender, unclaimed yard art." She set it gently beside my chair, whispered, "Sorry, ma'am," and vanished. Miranda tilted her head with theatrical surprise. "Oh, you still have pieces floating around? I didn't think the community kept them past the month." Her voice danced with cruel amusement perfected at country club meetings. I ran a finger along the tape, not opening it, just remembering. That box held every violation they'd confiscated. My recycled sculptures, the abstract pieces I'd painted to hide cipher patterns that logged every fraudulent transaction they thought was invisible. Art wasn't just my cover, it was evidence. I excused myself toward the coat check, pretending to look for a charger. Instead, I pulled out my second phone. No contacts, no apps, pure protocol, and typed, "Target confirmed mailless. Will verify signature on old font. Asset freeze protocol on standby." The message encrypted and disappeared. Back in the hall, the lighting had dimmed. Conversations turned shallow again. Weather, property values, scandals from someone else's zip code. Miranda stood at the head of the table, adjusting her scarf like it was a crown. She reached into her bag and pulled out an old-fashioned leather checkbook, burgundy with gold initials. The kind you carry when you want people to notice the money, not the gesture. She tore out a check with a flourish and passed it to the server with quiet instructions. I leaned forward just enough to catch the routing number on the stub. My stomach didn't drop. I'd memorized that number weeks ago. It belonged to a shell company registered to a defunct Nevada foundation. The same one that had popped up in a federal probe and then mysteriously vanished from public filings. They weren't just managing dues. They were moving dirty money. I swirled the last sip of my coffee, feeling the room shift. Miranda didn't see me watching, but someone else did, and he was already walking toward the table. The sun had dipped low enough to paint long gold streaks across the room, softening everything except the tension. Miranda sat 2 chairs down, fingers drumming the rim of her glass in tight circles. That polished smile was starting to crack at the corners, not guilt, preparation. A cousin-type neighbor, Jeremy, let out a half-laugh and raised his phone. "Hey, is this you?" He turned the screen outward. Grainy thumbnail of one of my older yard pieces listed on a discount resale site. Anonymous cardboard elegy, produced by a reclusive hobbyist. Unverified authenticity. Laughter bubbled up again. Not loud, but enough to sting. Enough to show someone had gone out of their way to humiliate me online and now in person. Lila, ever the tactician, murmured just loud enough for half the table, "Maybe this is why you should have stuck to following the rules." I looked at Leia, still staring at the screen with an uncertain grimace. I said evenly, "Did you know your Aunt President has 3 offshore accounts under shell corporations? Maybe someday I'll list those for resale too." Jeremy choked on his drink. Miranda's eyes snapped to mine. Lila's glass stopped moving. That was all the confirmation I needed. I leaned toward Miranda, voice so low it barely registered. "The account you used, routing number, ends in 4182. Do you want to know who owns that?" Her smirk twitched. She looked to Lila. That flicker was everything. I reached for my phone without breaking eye contact and typed slowly, pattern confirmed. Suggest targeting shell cascade. Send. Encrypt. Gone. The wire beneath the table lit up. The rest of the meeting blurred. The rubber chicken, the 4 small talk forks scraping china. All of it faded behind the hum of calculation in my head. Later, I stood near the hallway, ostensibly checking messages. Miranda slipped in behind me, heels silent on the marble. "You're bluffing," she said, leaning against the doorframe like we were schoolgirls sharing gossip. "And if you're not, you'll bring down your own name, your own standing in the community." I didn't turn. "This standing isn't mine. You sold it the day you laundered through the original community trust fund." Her breath caught for a split second. Then she straightened, brushed imaginary lint off her shoulder, and walked away. I returned through the side entrance. The air had shifted again, conversations hushed, everyone waiting for something they didn't want to name. I was heading toward the coat closet when a young server gently tapped my elbow. "Excuse me, you're Analyze, right?" I nodded, bracing for another jab. Instead, he smiled, genuine. "I just wanted to say thank you. What you did last year in Lane County, you saved my dad's house from foreclosure." He told me the investigator who stayed anonymous was the reason we kept our home. I blinked. No words. He gave a respectful nod and disappeared. I stood there next to the fireplace, surrounded by old plaques and manufactured smiles, and thought, even when you hide, the truth knows how to find you. The board had drifted outside for drinks on the back terrace, framed by string lights and polished stone balustrades. Sunset made everything look golden and picturesque if you ignored what it cost. Miranda stood by the makeshift bar, swirling something with too much citrus and not enough alcohol. She clinked her glass with a silver fork and raised it. "To legacies," she began, voice smooth. "The ones we inherit and the ones we invent when the first don't work out." Polite laughter trickled around the circle. I stepped forward before the mood could settle, lifting my own glass. "To legacies," I said, voice steady but low enough to freeze the room, and to knowing which signatures are admissible in court and which are forgeries. Utensils froze midair. Laughter died. I reached into my clutch and pulled out 2 folded documents. One of these is the original community trust charter. The other could cost someone in this room their license. A glass shattered somewhere. No one turned. Miranda's fingers tightened around her drink. She knew exactly where I was going. "You used the legacy account," I said directly to her, "tied to a charitable trust in your name. The moment that routing number hit our system, it triggered a federal alert. You didn't just move money. You forged community memory. You desecrated it." Miranda opened her mouth, but I didn't give her space. "And you used the original founder's name. You dragged him into this after we laid the groundwork for this neighborhood. After you cried at the dedication ceremony about honor and heritage, you buried him again, this time with greed." Silence hung, sacred and heavy. I folded the papers slowly and returned them to my clutch. I didn't yell. I didn't storm out. This wasn't theater. This was record. I took one step back, then another. I was almost to the exit when Miranda's voice cracked across the terrace like a whip. "You think this makes you look noble, Falcon?" Heads turned. Eyes widened. A woman near the garden arch whispered, "What did she just call her?" I didn't flinch. I smiled, because someone else had heard it too. That name had never been in any public record. Someone had leaked it. Someone inside this house. I turned toward the garden's edge where a few neighbors huddled around a phone. "Analyze, have you seen this?" I leaned in. A slick anonymous blog post. Who is Analyze Voss, really? Grainy surveillance-grade photos. Me stepping out of a courthouse in D.C. Me in tactical gear entering a warehouse in Tacoma. These weren't paparazzi shots. They were sealed files. My cousin neighbor asked, eyes wide, "How'd they get them?" I didn't answer. I turned and walked toward the east parlor, breath steady, mind slicing through fog like a clean blade. The room was empty except for one of my older yard sculptures they'd confiscated and relabeled echoes of compliance. I knew the pattern. It wasn't just color, it was code. Years ago, I'd embedded Delta, one cipher sequences into every piece as a safety net. Miranda hadn't just stolen my work. She'd used it as cover. My phone vibrated. Message from R. Confirm Delta. 1 embedded. If yes, ops may be active through it. Your name is being used. I stared at the sculpture another second, then typed back. Confirmed. Layer 4. She's using the cipher. I'm pulling jurisdiction. I stepped back onto the garden path. The crowd had loosened, people drifting toward desserts, whispers rippling like jazz through the hedges. I caught Miranda by the fountain, sipping like nothing had detonated. I approached slowly. She didn't blink. "Walk away, analyze. Take your little cardboard memories. Your yard art disappears before the headlines write themselves." I looked at her polished face. "You don't want to be in a headline next week," she added, colder. I stepped closer. "Neither do you. But the difference is I don't need to write your name in ink. You already wrote it in blood." She opened her mouth, closed it, and for the first time all evening, she looked unsure. I turned and walked away, certain. I didn't sleep that night, but someone else did. And while they slept, I built the opening to burn their bridge. The ballroom smelled like smoke and sugar. Half the candles had burned to stubs. Wine glasses stood abandoned. Conversations had fractured into low murmurs that never quite rose above the weight that had settled. I stood near the arched exit, coat over my arm, watching Miranda from a distance. She was boxed in by whispers and darting glances, cocktail untouched, phone clutched like a life raft. No one stood too close anymore. Truth doesn't always scream. Sometimes it just makes people vanish. Miranda's mother, the original board matriarch, appeared beside me without a word. Her eyes weren't red, but something in her expression had cracked. "You planned all of this?" she asked, voice carrying exhaustion, not anger. I answered evenly. "No, you did. I just didn't let it stay buried." She didn't argue. Her silence was confirmation enough. She turned and walked away with grace that once looked regal, but now felt rehearsed. Devin Lang had already slipped out after the toast, pacing in the parking lot on his phone like a man whose next call would be to his attorney. Miranda tried one last time. She cut through the crowd, toward me, with the same calculated poise she used on donors. But before she reached me, a state senator who'd been quietly watching stepped into her path and gently, firmly guided her away. Her face told me everything. It wasn't negotiation. Somewhere behind me a guest asked too loudly, "Is the FBI here right now?" The question landed like a stone. No one answered. No one laughed. I stepped out into the cold. The air hit sharp and bracing. I wrapped my coat tighter and walked down the garden path. Halfway to the car, I heard footsteps. It was Lorraine, a former Honest board member. "You gave up everything to do this," she said, pulling her shawl tighter. "They'll never thank you." I met her gaze. I didn't do it for gratitude. I did it because the truth never negotiates. She blinked, nodded once, and walked away. At my car, I paused. A note tucked under the windshield, no envelope, just folded. I opened it slowly. "Your father would have been proud." No full name. But the handwriting was familiar in a way that made my throat tighten. I tucked it inside my coat. Maybe I didn't lose a community tonight. Maybe I finally left the wrong one. Rain tapped on the window pane the next morning, polite reminder the world kept moving. Outside, Pinecrest was gray and slow. Inside my Airbnb loft, I sat cross-legged on the couch, black coffee going cold, television muted. Headline scrolled. State AG exposes financial misconduct in prominent HOA trust. They didn't name me yet, but I was the source, the match, the slow burn. My second phone rang. "Kane here. Department's greenlit formal asset review. You're clear to speak if you want to." Before the call ended, he added, "They froze 3 shell entities this morning. More coming." "You held the line, Voss." A text followed from the senator. "You didn't just expose a system. You exposed a culture. That takes spine. Don't mistake this for sympathy. It's respect." By noon, I'd seen 2 neighbors post Instagram stories, not about me, but close enough. Sometimes community isn't blood. Sometimes it's just a name you're forced to carry. Nice try, I thought. Scrub the blood, but leave the bruises. A knock at the door. Clara, the longtime community housekeeper, looked older in daylight, holding a sealed cardboard box. "He asked me to keep this for you years ago. Said you'd know when you'd earned it." Inside was a leather ID wallet, worn but well kept, and a handwritten note. "Keep going until they have no choice but to see you." I slipped the ID into my bag. That afternoon, I wandered into a local gallery off Liberty Street. Plain coat, no makeup. One of my earlier pieces hung near the back under warm light. A woman stood staring. "There's something about this one," she said to no one. "Whoever painted it, they've seen justice and heartbreak, and chose both." She turned, eyes meeting mine briefly. She didn't recognize me. I smiled faintly. I didn't choose heartbreak, but I did choose the truth. As I stepped back into the rain, a buzz lit my phone. Encrypted message from an agency I'd worked with once. "We saw what you did. There's a room in the Capitol that needs your judgment. Let us know when you're ready. I looked over the soaked street and whispered, not today. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to answer immediately. A week passed. Headlines faded. Whispers dulled. I found myself in a quiet cafe near the river, fingers wrapped around a war mug. No one knew my real name, and it was the most peaceful I'd felt in years. I hadn't heard from Miranda or Lila. They were used to controlling the narrative. When you can't control someone, you try to erase them. But I was done letting silence define me. I pulled out an old notebook and wrote 3 letters I'd never sent. The first to Miranda was sharp but honest. Dignity is not the absence of mistakes, but the ability to own them. The second to the original founder was harder. I wished he'd left louder footprints. The third to myself was only 2 lines. I'm not the shadow you painted. I'm a light you couldn't dim. Forgiveness doesn't mean handing back the key. It means unlocking the door from your side and walking out without waiting for it to close behind you. The next morning, I passed the community center near the square, the same place the young server had whispered his thanks weeks ago. This time I stepped inside. In the far corner, kids sat cross-legged. In front of them hung one of my murals, abstract, coded anonymous. A small girl, maybe 9, looked up and pointed. She's the one who sees everything but doesn't tell on you. I couldn't help but smile. Maybe, I whispered. That's who I've been all along. That evening, I returned to my loft. The rain was soft but persistent. In my mailbox was a plain white envelope. No stamp, no return address. Inside was a faded photo, my father holding me as a toddler, both of us caught in unguarded laughter. Behind it, a card. 5 handwritten words. You never had to prove it. No signature. But I didn't need one. The crowd outside the courthouse wasn't angry. It wasn't cheering. It was quiet, watchful, the kind of silence people reserve for things that force them to rethink power. I stood near the edge of the steps, not needing the spotlight. From this distance, I could still hear the clicks of shutters, the buzz of live coverage. But I wasn't part of the story anymore. Not the way they expected. Miranda descended the courthouse steps in cuffs. Her chin was lifted, eyes glassy. She walked like she still owned the sidewalk. Lila followed behind, smaller than I'd ever seen her, cream blazer, suddenly looking borrowed and loose. The district attorney stepped forward. This investigation began when one woman refused to let silence cover up corruption. Today we close a chapter, not just in legal terms, but in truth. I didn't smile. I didn't nod. I just listened, hands in my coat pockets, wind brushing hair across my cheek. I wasn't there to be seen, just to make sure the end really happened. They asked me later, how did you take them down? I said the truth. I didn't destroy them. They dismantled themselves. That evening, a nationally televised segment aired. The woman behind the frame. The voiceover recounted the financial deceit, shell companies, illicit routing. But the twist that caught the nation off guard wasn't the fraud. It was the cover, an artist working quietly behind the veil of yard hobby projects. They called her Falcon, but the world came to know her as Annalise Voss. The final shot panned to a gallery installation titled Inheritance, signed, sealed, erased. No plaque, just my voiceover. They made me the frame. I built the gallery. I turned off the TV before the credits rolled. I didn't need the reactions. The next day, I met the senator in a quiet office on the Hill. You could have gone scorched earth, he said, pouring tea. You didn't. I looked at the offer in front of me, a formal DOJ position, clean slate, my name, my terms. No, I said softly. I think I'll write something else now. And I did. That weekend, I walked through a local art fair anonymously, baseball cap low, jeans paint speckled by design. I stopped near one of my unsigned pieces. A child sat nearby, sketching her own version, tongue poking from the corner of her mouth. That painting, the girl's mother said to another passerby, is by the woman who helped people see what others tried to bury. The word stopped me mid-step. Maybe that's all art ever was, I whispered. Later that night, after the fair packed up, I returned to my loft. Lights blinked on slowly. One final envelope had been slipped through the mail slot. Inside, The original cardboard Madonna, my first raw piece, and a note. 5 words. The world tried to frame you. I always knew you were the artist. Signed with the original founder's name. I walked to the window, canvas tucked under my arm, wind tugging at my coat. Somewhere below, traffic hummed. Life moved on. They didn't steal my legacy, I whispered. They confirmed it.